You, the disciples of the Ascended Masters, are seeking to build into your selfhood the full-blown realization and now picturing of the eternal truth that you are yourselves a part of the divine nature, an individualization of the oneness, the allness that God is, truly a firstborn son or daughter of the Most High. Indeed, this is a re-education to the outer self, which has to unlearn a great deal that it has come to accept about itself, and which it has unfortunately built into its own outer memory through so many successive incarnations. Now you are striving to slough off those outer delusions and re-enter once again into that spiritual oneness, that primal identity of oneness, with a part of your selfhood that you are making the acquaintance of and coming to know more and more. You have the good fortune of being able to register with your hearts the tangibility and the God reality of so very many of the Ascended Masters. You also have the good fortune, in many cases, of being able to study the example of their lives while they too were in incarnation. In some cases, even walking the dusty roads of this earth side by side with so many of you. As you take the shining example of various ones who are now numbered amongst the Ascended Masters, such as your own beloved El Morya, Kuthumi, the Mahachohan, beloved Saint Germain and Jesus, and so very many others, you might take note that there are certain elements of their character that were present throughout the series of their culminating incarnations. One of those elements being a certain immovability within them, in the sense that rather than them being molded by environmental circumstances of the worldly age in which they happen to come into a given embodiment, molded by circumstances of birth, gender, class, economic status, and so forth, that these life streams seemed to be possessed of an undeniable power and capacity to remain immovable in the certitude of their own selfhood, and to in fact become a force moving history, moving those around them, molding and shaping not only the course of their own personal lives, but in most all cases, lifting up the whole fabric of mankind's consciousness and giving civilization an impetus forward How is it that they could accomplish this feat? The examples go on and on and on of these now ascended masters and how they bore up under the challenges of life. The consistency in all cases stems from the truth that already within their world there was an anchorage of their own beloved individual I am presence. And the pressure of God consciousness and the impetus of that God presence from within out, from what level that you have now come to know as the level of the individuality, at the level of the electronic body of the mighty I am presence, that presence, that God identity of the mighty I am, sent forth its charge and consciousness, lowering it through the various vehicles that you know so well, emerging upon the altar of the heart, emerging as a brilliant light in the mind, producing a certitude of knowing and conviction that did not ask anyone else's permission or look for validation on the part of some other segment of society, but was rather a self-evident truth that was its own witness and its own best defense. If you study the lives of these who are now ascended, you will see that already they were transitioning from this world into their status as firstborn sons and daughters of God, those whom we now also know as the ascended masters. The consciousness of their own mighty presence was already well seated within the chalice of their outer awareness. This enabled them to wield a power in life beyond all human calculation. And our forthcoming Easter class and the Acropolis to follow is intended to actually reveal certain elements of the God consciousness of your mighty I am presence that perhaps you have not encountered in the times when you have been lifted into the communion with your presence. As you study first with your mind and heart these elements of consciousness and make room for them to give expression in your life, they will more and more then be something that your presence can share with you. And you too will be able to express that immovable certitude of that God self, wielding that power, releasing it, and moving it forward in your own life and affairs, and cooperating with that mighty presence in the ultimate accomplishment of that which it strives to do. the particular element of the consciousness of your mighty presence that we will be acquainting you with, perhaps for the very first time, not intellectually, but as a matter of feeling it, experiencing it, rising into it, is the consciousness that the beloved mighty I Am presence lives, moves, and has its being in eternity, and is a being that is of cause alone. In reality, the presence too receives back the life which it sends forth and bestows upon all of life, but because it is always sent forth as a blessing to life, there is never a human limitation associated with it. And so there is never a repercussion of that which could be considered an effect. Only the bestowal of cause, and more cause. So as you look forward to this upcoming Easter class, do begin to consider what it means to operate in eternity, outside the bonds and confinements of time, space, place, or condition. For while there is that blessed focus and concentration of individuality that we often speak of in reference to your presence is not only that focus of concentration, but it is also the limitless, untrammeled God freedom of the allness of the presence. It is am as well as I. It is presence as well as I and am. So there is a boundlessness, a limitlessness, an absence of confinement in consciousness that is the natural habitat and home of your individual mighty I Am presence. It lives, as you might say, in eternity, which is a state of consciousness that does not even actually experience the sequence of past or present or future. You should not then consider that in returning to this level of awareness of your presence, that you are somehow or another going back in time. Not at all, in any sense whatsoever. For you are actually rising out of the whole dimension where such a thing as time or space could ever exist. Those things are actually useful tools at the level of the causal body realm, at the level of the Buddhic world, and they were likewise intended to be kind of like a scaffolding upon which life would hang itself, would suspend itself and build itself around that scaffolding. But by no means were they ever intended to be a constricture and a confinement to mankind's consciousness. This is not at all either an abstract, unreal flight of fancy, nor something that is impractical for you to consider. Because, in fact, part of the whole definition of the human predicament is that the blessed heart flame has become enamored with the world of outer form and energy and so forth. The outer consciousness has, for so many countless incarnations, become almost hypnotized into a permanent state of the confinements of time and space. This magic, or Maya, works its power only because the mind of the life stream in the outer consciousness has turned in upon itself in an egotistical way, and peering out of the little 5 forms of senses that are available to it within that confinement of self, it projects the whole illusion of the confinements of time and space. And unfortunately, because the heart flame and the consciousness is creative and does have the power of the presence with the crystal cord energy to strengthen whatever thought and feeling accept in fashion with their qualification, this delusion, once it is becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that makes the stricture of that confinement more and more powerful. The opposite is also true. As you actually step outside of yourself, your outer self, and step into the level of consciousness that is ongoing in eternity of your very own selfhood, operating in the electronic body, which provides a form and a vehicle for consciousness, but is in no way a limitation on that consciousness. You then, like the ascended masters before you, will be able to observe more dispassionately not only the passing trends of the times, but you will be able to even have a certain very powerful and healthy detachment from those things that your own outer self may be going through out here in time and space. As you withdraw the fixation which the consciousness has poured as its attention into those outer limitations, and reinvest that same faith and acceptance and attention upon the goings on in the consciousness of each one's own mighty presence, you are then actually liberating yourself from just being carried along like a rolling stone that is being moved along by the ebb and flow of the mass karmic conditions that sweep the populuses of the world's unascended life streams into those cars of juggernaut and all forms of karmic recompense that do come along constantly. There is a tremendous, tremendous power that you are able to invoke and wield. One of the ways in which this has been described is as a series of stages. After there has been that first lightning-like illumination from your own beloved presence, to where there shines into the encasement of the four lower bodies that shaft of the light that indicates the power of this consciousness. Once that has occurred, the next thing that will happen is that you will, for example, observe what is going on as if you were no longer a participant, but merely rising above it into a level of a dispassionate observer. Many times, people who have been caught in the midst of an unpredictable accident that is happening to them in the very moment that it is happening, one of the inescapable senses that they sometimes experience is, number one, this is unreal. And number two, this isn't really happening. That sense is due to the overshadowing of the Christ consciousness of the individual that is projecting into their awareness a truth. The truth being that only that which goes on in the realms of God reality, in the realms of the divine mind, could actually be properly denominated to be God reality with a capital R. Anything that does not contain that level of God reality and perfection, anything that is occurring therefore in the realm of human qualification, is not taking place in the divine realm, and is therefore unreal. That may, in one sense, appear to be small consolation to the outer self in the moment that experience is taking place. But if the consciousness has been able to find the anchor point in the time and spaceless one of the mighty I Am presence, if that consciousness has found that anchor point, then the center of gravity of selfhood begins to be transferred more and more over to that God presence. And gloriously, that God presence more and more is able to ray forth from the level of that God presence the full limitless expansiveness that is ongoing in the level of the presence. You then, in cooperation with your presence, are able to invoke that time and timeless, rather, and spaceless totality of the mighty I Am presence and bring it to bear in the things of your life. This means that it will take so very much of the sting out of events that happen along the way. It will also withdraw their power to exert a glamour over you. Do you know what is meant by that? It is when there is a projection of an image that is unreal, that is appropriated by the consciousness and allows it and utilizes the energy of the consciousness to build up an unreal image, a glamour, if you will. The best example of this in the world today is probably what takes place in the middle, during the course of a movie experience. When a person is relaxed in the semi-darkness, gives themselves over to the story that is on the screen, there is, for the time being, most of the time, a suspension of disbelief, and there is not a sense on the part of the individual, this is me, I'm sitting in this chair, life is going on outside the theater, and there is this series of images that are being flashed upon the screen. There's this barrage of sound that is being bombarded into my ears. These things are taking place, but I am not fully engrossed within them. Most individuals, after a few minutes, lose that self-awareness and are totally engrossed, their thoughts and feelings amalgamated with that which is on the screen. And their consciousness, for the time of that, is living whatever experience is orchestrated by the director and the producer and the writer and so forth, molding and shaping their consciousness. It is a very fair analogy to what this world is out here in so-called reality, when it is assessed and weighed by either an ascended master or one's own mighty I Am presence. For from that perspective, those things that are not perfect, that do not rise to the level of that God consciousness, are even more profoundly unreal. And that is why you as students are being trained in that glorious fiat, you have no power, because you are actually withdrawing the power that has been afforded to those appearances as if they were real. As this consciousness that is within your beloved mighty I Am presence is more and more shared with your heart flame and your waking awareness, you too will lose that total dependency upon the outer world and that total investiture in this outer life. And you will be both a participant and also an observer, looking on from within the vehicle of your Christ presence, looking on from within the vehicle of your mighty I am presence, standing outside of time and space, standing in the totality of the oneness of God life, the oneness of the allness of the presence, able to send forth creation from that seat of consciousness, but no longer chained to that which one creates in the worlds, the outer worlds, but rather rising above those outer worlds. Do you think, for example, that beloved Helios and Vesta have to make their lunch, pack their lunch in the morning and go to work to make the sun to shine, and are, as it were, bound to some confinement in even the spiritual inner levels of the physical sun, forever doomed to occupy that place, kind of the way the ancients had Atlas forever having to hold up the world on his shoulders, or hold up the sky on his shoulders, as the case may be. No, indeed. They are able to render that service in time and space by fashioning and sending forth expressions of their love and creativity, all the while they themselves remain poised in those eternal realms, sending that forth for the sweet sake of love itself. This concept of eternity is absolutely a power that you can learn to wield. As you do so, a number of things will take place. First, and perhaps most importantly of all, you will no longer be herded about by those who are the opinion makers and the fashioners of the trends of the times, who make merchandise of the mankind of earth. You won't be molded and shaped by them, but you will be truly individuals who are able to rise out of the sequence of time itself and re-enter that realm of the eternal. It is so very important that your attention be drawn over and over and over again to these actions that are taking place at the level of the God presence in eternity, and even beyond eternity. Of course, you have the glorious mystery of the One, the singularity of God in the One. As you do this, you will be feeding your attention where it should belong, which is upon the infinite source of your being, your mighty I Am presence. You will be concerned with the goings on at the level of your presence. You will, if you are going to measure time at all, you won't necessarily pay quite so much attention to your own birthday in this embodiment, to the circumstances of your heritage in this embodiment, or your earthly lineage in this embodiment. You won't be identifying with the family tree that goes back X number of generations. You won't be identifying with your DNA as a human being or any of those things. You won't be limited and confined by them, but rather you will be, as should be the case in all cases, already transitioning into that glorious, eternal body of your presence that is made without hands and ongoing in eternity. As each of you enter back again, once again, into that presence, you will not be like an explorer that is entering a foreign land. It will be familiar. It will be truly a remembering. And you will realize that there has been this ongoing God consciousness and culture of a sort that continues to exist with your beloved mighty I Am presence. In the 19th century and in the 20th century, how the trends of the times have changed here in this world. What a different era it was in the 1950s, in the 1930s, in the 1890s. How different an era in different parts of the world at the same moment in time. And unfortunately, most people in an unguarded way end up becoming indelibly saturated over and qualified with their own upbringing. It defines them and confines them. And they embrace it almost without thinking. There was a very interesting character study that was done of a little infant child that was born in Hungary before the fall of the Iron Curtain, who was left behind for what her parents expected would be a very short time, while they escaped and sought to make a home for her here in America. Unfortunately, she was not able to follow them immediately. And so you see two different worlds existing side by side. You see the world here in the West in America in the late 1940s and the early 1950s, with all of the elements of our pop culture and a certain freedom and largesse and that was going on here in America. And at the same time, you see this little infant girl being dressed up in her uniform and being paraded amongst all of the children of that era who were part of the communist mass psychology, wearing their uniforms, repeating their phrases that were so standard for that time. And you see this little child bonding with her environment, bonding with the family that took her in, and becoming comfortable waving the red flag, comfortable in her rough-hewn garments and her little kerchief that she wore on her head. And essentially just filling out and fitting into that very austere, poverty-stricken, communist consciousness with all of its gray skies and terrible conditions. Nevertheless, it was the only world that she knew. And therefore, associating it in her childhood, she could only think that it was the perfect world for her. Then, probably at the age of 10 or 11, maybe a little bit younger, her parents did manage to arrange her release to join them in the West. And here she is, dressed up in pinafores, watching Howdy Doody on the television, learning about all of the modern things that preteen girls in the mid-1950s were so happy to be engaged in. But she really is in a state of culture shock, not relating to her birth parents or her sister, and for the most part, yearning for that old life, yearning for that old way, because it had been imprinted upon her, and it was now, in essence, appearing to be the self that she was. So the time went on. Fast forward to the time that she is in her high school years, and she is still living the fantasy of her childhood in communist Hungary, as if that were the highest and best of life that life had to offer. Eventually, she was able to convince her parents that she did have to return, which she did do. And of course, she saw firsthand and experienced from a different perspective that the many things that she had thought were so wonderful, so glorious, were in fact only the wonderful looking out of a very young child into a world that was not so very nice at all. And having had the benefit of the contrast of life in the West, she was able to make a more illumined choice. Now, in this example, we're not equating life in the West with life in eternity. Both should stand in stark contrast as an example of what happens to souls in embodiment when they come into a given situation in this earth, to where from earliest childhood on, the consciousness melds and blends with its surroundings and accepts them as if they are reality, as if they are the truth of themselves, embracing them in so many different ways. And living the whole life based upon that. And that is what human nature is and what it does in each successive incarnation. Here and there along the way, you get very strong individuals with a sense of self who mold and shape the culture, mold and shape music and dress and fine arts and so many different things. And the masses appropriate all of that almost in a wholesale manner without assessing what it really is. So that is what it means to be a life stream that is reincarnating time after time in this earth. We're all, in a sense, like that little girl who have amalgamated ourselves to terra firma and the many things of this life, never dreaming that there is another entire God consciousness, another entire realm of eternity beyond time and space that stretches on in the realm of God being and a limitless life, and that we are still living there at the level of our mighty I Am presence, still possessed of the powers of that mighty I Am presence. And that it is time, instead of even whatever may have been the molding and shaping factors of this lifetime's personality, it is time now for the impetus to originate in the mighty I Am presence and its God consciousness out through the consciousness, and to send that forth as far as our own individual lives are concerned. And that presence is to remold and reshape our life, our experience, our reality after the image of that divine presence. This indeed is possible and must be done before the ascension can occur. It is the energetic work that the mighty I Am presence is forever about, sending forth that impetus of eternal life, sending forth the God consciousness that it has at inner levels, and from within out, remolding and reshaping all that we are after that fashion of the divine. As disciples of the Ascended Masters, you have been trained to consider that your personal world extends to where your electronic circle is, and that within that electronic circle, your mighty I Am presence is to reign supreme. That is the good news of this teaching, that as you are alert, as you are in what the Buddha called right thought, stepping back and not allowing the bodies to just mechanically roll along, embracing whatever sensation presents to them, but rather in that alertness of the presence, adopting and opting for the God consciousness of that presence, building that into every aspect of thought and feeling, word, deed, and action. You are bringing that down and out into expression. Ultimately, in the final rituals of transfiguration, of resurrection, and of the ascension, more and more of that light of the presence will at long last be able to come forth and remold and reshape everything of the formative nature after the pattern of that glorious, mighty I Am presence. Because you will have embraced that God consciousness as the reality of who you are. If anything, the liberating truth as brought by the Ascended Masters is that there is no need whatsoever to postpone the moment in which you make that transition. For you can affirm, I am here and I am there even now, and be in that eternal consciousness of the presence and allow that, like the light from the sun, to stream and to stream and to stream forth to fill every aspect of your life with all that it is and bring forth after its kind. While there are a whole host of cultures, past and present, that have existed in this world, you will rejoice to know that there are likewise eternal cultures. Many ascended masters come to mind who are themselves the very incarnation of cultures that are timeless in their nature. When you encounter such a one as Lady Master Vesta or Pallas Athena, even the goddess of liberty, it's hard to imagine that they ever were unascended, for the sense of the eternal is so close to them, and the sense that they are so utterly transcendent above this earth. It's no wonder that those who did encounter them in times past leaped to the assumption that they were of a different order of beings altogether than the human race, that they must have always been that way. From the first moment of time, they must have always been that way. It's not quite that way, but when you enter eternity, it has always been eternal, and it has always been that way. As we transition then from the conference into the Acropolis, you will find that in eternity, the realities that operate in eternity, that are ongoing, are a power that you are able to draw upon. Every attribute of the Godhead that you invoke when you say, I am this or that, they are not manufactured on the fly in the instant after you make that call. You are rather affirming an eternal verity, an eternal reality that has an eternal existence, an eternal being, an eternal potential of power, an eternal activity of life that is ongoing and ongoing, that has never been touched by the ravages of such a paltry thing as time, much less past or present or future. These are aspects of God reality that have always, 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 always been there in the eternal now, changeless at their highest level, but yet out of that changeless nature, issuing forth as the spiral from within out unfolds as the whole phenomenon that is known as the sidereal universe of time and space and all of the twinkling galaxies and stars and everything else. It's all come forth out of that eternity, out of that timeless, spaceless being that the presence is. And as you register the various facets of this eternal being, facets like God qualities, like victory or purity or light, fire, all of the God qualities are all there as facets of this eternal being. You will understand that as I am those qualities here and now, it is not some leap of faith into the void, hoping and trusting that it might be true, or considering that your presence is going to, out of nothing, make that quality that you are calling forth. But you will realize that out of eternity and its being, its timeless being, it comes forth, accomplishes its purpose, performs its perfect work, expends its force, builds up whatever form or expression it needs to in the coming to be of creation. And when it has fulfilled its purpose and is no longer needed in the great economy of the Godhead, it will be returned back to the infinite reality of itself from whence it come, there to be drawn forth again, and to come forth again and again. And oh, as you register those realities, then at long last, especially will your feeling world be able to participate and cooperate in its role in the creative process as you're giving your calls. For your feelings will realize that they stem from this timeless reality that is the bedrock of all, the bedrock behind all of creation. And all of these qualities are actually the God reality that comes forth. None of this is complicated. I don't care how it may sound. None of it is so ephemeral that it is hard to grasp. It really is not. And you should have the sense that your mighty I Am presence is really in charge of all of that and has this fingertip delicate ability to wield the powers of creation, playing upon some at one time and others at another time, to bring it forth into creation. And you will actually learn how you can register some of those timeless realities in your own world and bring them forth into creation. As you do this, you'll no longer be either a Homo sapien, either a human being, or a Tom, or a Mary, or a Jim, or a whomever. You won't be merely a citizen who is appearing in the 21st century in this little earth, but you will be as you have always truly been, that glorious individualization of the Godhead that is outpicturing its own inherent truth of its being.